What's going on, guys? Welcome back to After the Credits, the review show that no one asked for. Today's topic is Fight Night Champion. Now, with this being a sports title, it's probably going to be a shorter episode just because there's not a whole lot to talk about, but we did roll credits on it, and that qualifies it for the series, so we're going to talk about it. So let's roll the intro and get into the discussion on Fight Night Champion. So the way to roll credits in Fight Night Champion is to play through the career mode, which sees you playing as Andre Bishop, who is an up-and-coming middleweight boxer that just dominates the amateur scene. Now, this talent catches the attention of influential boxing promoter D.L. McQueen, who offers to manage him. However, Andre refuses, sensing McQueen's shady business dealing. This rejection leads to a series of events that change his life forever. As Andre rises the ranks, McQueen, seeking revenge, frames him for a crime he didn't commit, landing him in prison. While incarcerated, Andre is forced into brutal underground fights where he toughens up and survives the harsh conditions. After serving his time, he is released and begins a long road to redemption, returning to boxing but struggling to rebuild his career. Meanwhile, his younger brother Raymond Bishop becomes a professional fighter under McQueen's management, causing tension between the siblings. Andre eventually fights his way back to the top, now a heavyweight, defeating McQueen's fighters and exposing his corruption. And the final fight of the game is against Isaac Frost, who has kind of been antagonist in the background, not the main antagonist. D.L. McQueen is definitely the main antagonist, but Isaac Frost is like your arch rival, and that's the final fight that you do in the game, which is a pretty difficult one to say the least. Now, the career mode does throw a few interesting twists into the gameplay, which I actually really appreciated. A lot of time with these sports games, it just ends up being one fight after another with no real changes to gameplay. However, throughout the career of Andre Bishop, for example, there's one fight in particular where in the first round, you damage your right hand and can only throw left hands for the remainder of the fight, which is kind of annoying, but also pretty realistic because those types of injuries do actually occur in boxing and you have to adapt and make do. So I'm glad they did throw a couple kind of unique variables into these fights to mix up the gameplay a little bit. Now, graphically, this game holds up phenomenally well. I remember this game being a bit of a looker back in the day, and I gotta be honest, even here in 2025, it still holds up much better than I even anticipated. The sound design in the game is also extremely well done, everything from the voice acting to the impact sounds of the punches. All of that stuff is done extremely well. I never experienced any weirdness or strangeness coming from any of the sounds, which honestly is about the best compliment I can give a game like this. So very well done in that department. Now let's move on to the most important aspect of a game like this, which is the gameplay. So before we dive into that, I just want to mention that the performance is very, very good in this game. It holds a steady frame rate throughout the entire experience, so no issues there. And again, like I mentioned before, this game actually holds up graphically pretty well to modern standards, so that's a huge compliment, considering this is a older title and runs very, very well. Now, to throw punches in this game, you have two options. You can essentially use the face buttons on the controller, or they introduced a new mechanic in this game, which is like they call the total punch control or something like that, that you can actually throw punches using the right stick on the controller. I didn't use the right stick very often. Most of the time, though, I used the face buttons. Now, along with the face buttons, you can also hold the right bumper, and that'll put your guard up, so it'll put your hands up, and then you can use the left bumper, which will initiate a sway or a slip move where you move your head to avoid punches. And then the right trigger is the punch modifier, so it'll change a simple right hook to a right haymaker, vice versa. And then the left trigger is kind of a push a button, so you can essentially push people away if they're being really aggressive. So unfortunately, this all sounds good, and Again, I don't exactly know how they could do it any differently, but it leaves you in a position where you're playing the game like this all the time. So you have both your pointer and middle finger on both triggers at all times, which just leads to a little bit of kind of weird gameplay, because I'm used to kind of relaxing my middle fingers on the bottom and just kind of using my pointer fingers on the triggers. But you have to have total control of all the triggers in this game, which leads to just a little bit of an uncomfortable gameplay experience for me personally, just because it forced me to hold the controller in a way that I'm not used to. But that could just be the fact that the DualShock 3's triggers are bad, in my opinion. I just don't like the design of them. I don't like how much movement there is in the trigger. I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's a weird complaint of mine. I've never liked triggers on DualShock 3s, but ultimately it led to a little bit of uncomfortability at the beginning until I learned kind of how to do it properly, and then obviously I adjusted and it wasn't so bad. Now, the only real gameplay complaint that I have is when you initiate a sway with the left bumper, you get glued into the ground, which can just feel a little stiff at times. I don't necessarily know if there's really a way around this, because usually if you are doing head movement, you are going to want to stay planted in place. But it just kind of turns into a back and forth battle of closing the distance on your opponent, holding the left bumper, and then just kind of swaying all over the place, but feeling very immobile at the same time. So it's just move in, get in range, throw a punch, sway, throw another punch, sway, throw another punch, and then back away. So it's kind of a weird feeling. Again, I don't know if there's ever a situation where you'd want to use head movement while also moving, and I don't know how that could have been programmed into the game without it being almost too loose feeling. But it's just something I noticed throughout the playthrough that I thought was kind of strange. Maybe I just used the sway a little bit too much. I'm not exactly sure. But it just leads to kind of a weird looking experience, I guess is how I will put it. I also want to compliment the game on the fact that fighters actually have chins in this game, which I think is really, really phenomenal. It's going to sound like a weird talking point, but this development team has since gone on to create the UFC games. I think it's rumored that another Fight Night may be on the horizon, but they've said that forever, so who actually knows? But in the UFC games, I've always found that you can go into fights and just throw haymakers from the beginning of the first round, and typically you can get a knockout with any character against any character within the first 1 to 2 rounds usually. So it takes a lot of the strategy out of the actual sport, whereas in Fight Night Champion, you cannot do that. You can go in and throw haymakers for the first 2 rounds, but usually these fights are 12 rounds long, and you're going to be gassed, and you're going to have very low stamina for the rest of the fight. So in this game, you really have to go into each fight with a little bit of a strategy, which is really important to the sport of boxing, and it's not actually a system I've seen implemented very well, and this game does it phenomenally. The second half of your career mode, when you move from middleweight to heavyweight, those heavyweight boxers have very high durability, so it's going to be hard to put them away. And then even when you transition to just doing some fight now mode, just doing fight now, whatever, just the mode where you pick 2 fighters and go in and fight, even in those modes, you're going to end up going deep in a lot of these rounds. So you really have to think about your stamina consumption, the amount of damage that you take, and things like that, which I think is phenomenal. It shows the best aspect of the sport, in my opinion, which isn't getting punched in the face. It's will and endurance and strategy. And this game captures that better than any boxing game I've ever played. All right, so that's all of the talking points that I really wanted to address for Fight Night Champion. As I said, there's not a whole lot to talk about here. It's a sports game with a career mode that's about 6 to 8 hours long. And it's not the most interesting thing to talk about, really, but ultimately, I think it's a very, very good game. I think it is worth picking up a copy for PS3 or Xbox 360 if you see it out and about. I'm not sure what it goes for on price charting. I think it's around $20 or so. I think it's worth it for that, especially if you have someone around that will play co-op with you or play against you. I think having 2 people sitting next to each other on the couch playing this game could lead to some very interesting moments, especially with that strategy aspect that we mentioned before. It's going to really lead to some cool moments. So I'm going to slot Fight Night Champion in the B tier. Now, feels a little low, but at the end of the day, it is just a boxing game, and there's not going to be a reason for me to really return to it again. After I completed the career mode, obviously, the servers for this game are no longer online. There's no online multiplayer. So the only real other option you have is to go in to do Fight Now, which is just one fighter against another, and I just don't see myself doing that very often unless I have someone come over to game with me and they want to box a little bit. I think couch co-op in this game or whatever could be a lot of fun with the strategy that is required in this game, as I previously mentioned, but don't see myself going back to it. But the visuals, the sound design, all of that stuff is going to go ahead and be enough to put it above the average C tier. So I'm going to put it in B tier. I think that's a good spot for it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the hell out of you. I have another video queued up, ready to go for next week, so be prepared. Next Sunday, we will have another After the Credits video that will be released. If you caught any of the live streams, you know what that one's about. Was a fun playthrough, game from 97. So old, but very, very fun. So look out for that in the future. Thanks for watching. I love you all. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And we'll see you on the next one.